Big smiles. 3. Welcome to Great Mondays Radio. I'm Josh Levine, your host, and today I have Colleen Murray, who is a partner at Jump Associates, a strategy and innovation firm that works with Fortune 500 companies to keep them future focused. And we're going to be talking all about purpose, this really important aspect of culture and something that I find really, really compelling. And so Colleen seems to think she has some hard data to prove that a purpose-driven company going to outperform a non-purpose-driven company. Colleen Murray, it is so good to see you. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Oh, thank you, Josh. Thrilled to be here.
So you have been with Jump Associates for a long time as a partner. You and I have known each other for a long time, since way back when we were working together on Culture Lab X, and right when people weren't really thinking about culture so much. So we have quite a history, and that's why I'm really excited to talk to you, because I know you've been so focused on and appreciative of the power of culture inside of organizations. And I think you have a particular unique point of view in this, this idea that you help organizations stay future focused. And more specifically, you've been working a lot recently on purpose. So can you tell me a little bit about why you all have worked on purpose? I mean, there's a lot of things that a strategy and innovation firm can work on. What purpose seems so fuzzy?
Yeah, it can for sure. Yeah, you're right. I work at a strategy firm, and people at our best, people pay us a lot of money to deliver strategies, right? That they should bet on for the future, right? And I love that work. That's why I've been at Jump for 20 years, like you said. Time flies, is crazy, right? But pretty early on, I also learned that even the best strategies are what we think. Like, you do all this research and kind of like make it defensible, but like, they just don't go anywhere if you don't have someone inside that company like making it happen, right? Like, it is all about people. Like, you need to operationalize it. Like, it can't just be strategy is not like what is the graph in the PowerPoint, right? It has to be the 1,000 million little decisions that are made throughout the organization every single day, right? And so like that involves like often a strong leader who's going to champion that idea about change, right? Often there's some sort of change that happens, and we don't like change as human beings. That's hard. You need a leader who's going to champion it, right? And you need people that are going to follow that leader, right? And so that really does speak to culture, right? You want to get people like jazzed up, like fired up to do something, to like come to work and like make that stuff happen today, right? And so you kind of like, in my work and my work at Jump, like I started kind of looking under the surface a little bit, right? And explore what makes that change happen, right? And like, if people and companies have a clear why, a deeper reason to do the work they're doing beyond getting that paycheck, we find they're more driven to make something happen, right? To drive change to happen, right? And I would call that purpose, right? We know that people as individuals, I don't know about for you, for me, like other people we know, when people feel really strong about who they are and what their purpose is in the world, they tend to be more focused and more driven and more confident, right? And I think the same is true for organizations, right? And that's really how I started working in this space, right? Like that understanding, helping organizations understand their bigger why can really be a beacon and a filter, we say, right? Not just about the fuzzy culture, but really a beacon and filter, not just for recruiting and retaining employees, but really engaging customers and like making money, driving return for their shareholders if you do it right.
Yeah, I think one of the things that as a someone that, someone that lives, a professional that lives in this kind of modern, cluttered, option-rich society, saying no to certain things is really important. And having a purpose, whether you're an individual, a team, or an organization, being able to go, no, that's not going to help me get where I'm going, is going to be really important.
Totally. And I think, I think that was my personal experience. Before I have been a Jump for a long time, but Josh, we're kind of old now, I guess. I've had some jobs even before I worked at Jump, right? And I think I worked at a lot of places that I think I would say had strong cultures. Like, it's one of the things, culture exists, whether you define it as a culture or not. There's
Exactly.
something there, right?
That's right.
And I worked at some strong cultures that I wouldn't say I were great cultures, or maybe they just didn't personally resonate with me, right? I think
Exactly.
like very early in my career, I worked like in the first .com, bubble of the 90s, right? I mean, and that was like everything you might stereotypically think about that time. Like it was super fun, and we had food and beer and foosball tables and parties, and all my friends worked there because we hired each other. It was like super fun, right? I mean, I loved that time of my life. But like pretty quickly, the work kind of felt, it left a little to be desired for me. It was a little flat. Like I was like my role is mostly a designer then, like designing early websites, right? And I want to make something great, right? For the clients who are paying us money, for whoever was going to be looking at this website. I'd be like, who is this for? And like, wow, who's going to be using it? And I got a lot of like, it's good enough, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna like time's up, right? Let's go have a beer, kind of thing. It's like it's good, right?
Yep.
And so that was a strong culture, right? But it didn't really. It left me wanting more, like for what, right? And fast forward when I eventually found my way to jump, right? Like I found myself in another strong culture, and it wasn't always easy. Like I was sort of thrown into um, things like, um, leaning into one of our values is intention, like having to lean into that, like to learn to give and receive sometimes tough feedback, right? And coaching, right? To show up with curiosity and passion every day, and really expect each other to live our values and call each other out when we're not, right? That is not always easy. But
That's
those
not
values really,
that's not fun.
it's not, it can, there are many days that were challenging, right? But I don't know, there was something about that that very much resonated with me personally, that kept me coming back, right? And I think it is because, at least at Jump, we have identified our greater purpose, right? Which is our purpose is to transform lives through learning and growth, right? And that I could see how those values really laddered up. They were mechanisms, they were means, they were of activities and actions and behaviors, a series of those things that could ladder up to how we could all live that purpose every single day. And that I just personally resonated with. And I think that's a big reason why I'm still there 20 years later, right? So I
Right.
think that like big awareness, that connection is that like cultures are great when they actually are in service of a greater why, that greater purpose.
So, one of the most compelling arguments that I find people resonate with is you have to answer the question why before your employees start asking it. Because when they start asking it, it's too late almost, right? You're like, so
Totally.
I kind of think about like, you're working really hard, you're doing a late night, quarter end or whatever it might be, and they go, why am I not home? Like, this is really hard. And so you got to have that why in place. So let's get into some of the observations that you have been part of, some projects that and clients that you've worked with, and how that's really improved their performance, their bottom line. Can you share a little bit about maybe one or two of the clients that you have worked on purpose with, and how that changed or amplified their strategy?
Yeah. So, I think one of the biggest unlocks for me, for us, doing this purpose work is being able to have a really clear definition of what it means to be a purpose-driven company, right? Because, like you
Okay.
say, you're right, totally, you are right. Like you need a purpose, right? But I think that is like sort of step one, like having an activated purpose. Like, can I actually articulate what is that reason for the company to exist beyond making money? So sometimes organizations that we work with have that coming in, and sometimes they don't, right? And so one of the organizations, to your point, that we've worked with over the years, we helped Target, who we all know, probably most of us know Target, have spent some time in a Target,
Mhm.
to identify their purpose and their values. And I
Did they
think
have
that
did
has
they have something coming in? Did they have a
um,
purpose?
they did not have an articulated purpose in that way. They had other things. They had a mission and they had some values. And so there was something there, right? Like it's not like they had never thought about it. Like clearly, to your point, there was a culture there.
Of course, yeah.
And there's a lot of positive stuff that were kind of driving that culture, right? And so we went in and kind of like talked to a bunch of they're what we call leaders and lifers. Like they're leaders in terms of what they care about and what makes them tick. And lifers, people who've been there for a really long time that can tell us the stories, not just of today, but of, 20 years ago and kind of what made Target great. And that's a real perspective that we often bring when we do this work. I feel like coming from a place of what I would call like appreciative inquiry. A lot of organizations say like, I want to be like Starbucks. I want to be like, Google. And you're like, okay, but you're not Google. Is that what you tell your kids? Right. You're like, why you want to be more like your brother? It's like, no, you want to be more like yourself. How do you like play to your own strengths? And we go in and it's kind of a process of more like excavation, I would say, like kind of understanding like what is there and digging in and kind of shedding light on it and putting some words on something, as opposed to trying to like have it be a creative act where you're gonna come in and like just whiteboard and be like, what do we want the purpose to be? That's cool, right? Because that tends to be one of like, I don't know. There are, I think, a lot of organizations that unfortunately do that these days. And it's like you put it up on your website and it sounds good because they feel like they want a purpose and people are asking them for the purpose. But then what? Then what are you going to do, right? Because the minute you put that out into the world, people are going to hold you to it. So I think having that activated purpose is like step one, right? I think you also like real purpose-driven companies, I think we see also then have an aligned culture around that purpose, what we talked about, connection between values and behaviors with that greater why, right? A consistent set of beliefs and behaviors that people inside and outside the company can even like count on you, right? Like that it like is genuine. I think we see other purpose-driven companies have this idea, I would call it stakeholder centricity, right? Like a mindset of creating value beyond just the employees or the investors who might be making money, right? So actually caring and thinking about what they're doing and how they're acting in the world and how that might impact their customers or their suppliers, right? Or their vendors. I think a company like Whole Foods actually, at least from where they started, is like really great at doing this, like because they, care a lot about their farmers and where their food is coming from and how it's being sourced and all those things were really embedded in the organization from the beginning. And I think that's one of the reasons that sort of drives, I would say, they have a pretty strong purpose. They're a pretty good purpose-driven organization. I think as an aside, now they've been acquired by Amazon. There's a bunch of like, we'll see how that pans out. But, I think I'm thinking of the Whole Foods that,
the original
from the beginning.
Whole Foods.
And the original Whole Foods, right? And then I think, some of the other things that we talked about before, like having a idea of like, how do you approach leadership, right? And managing like next level leadership, like actually training and thinking about developing leaders to be prepared to lead for not just today, but the future, right? That is like potentially ambiguous and uncertain, and bringing that through a lens of future focus, right? A time horizon for planning and execution that is beyond like this quarter or this year, right? But is actually for the future.
Tell me.
So I think, so I mean, it's a lot, but I just mention all those things because I think that there sometimes is a misconception. It's like, we have a purpose. We're a purpose-driven organization. I would say that is step one, but like to truly live and be able to operationalize the bigger why, like you need all the culture, the idea of who your stakeholders are, the leadership, the like planning mechanisms to all really come together to be able to like make it true and real and be able to like bring it to life.
You recall what you ended up with at Target, the purpose?
Oh, you're going to call me on that now, Josh.
That's why I asked the question. You could say no. Sure, you have it up. All right, so I'll continue to ask that question. All right, so I want to.
It is
Okay.
actually. Target's purpose is to help all families discover the joy of everyday life.
To help all families discover the joy of everyday life. I love it. Okay, so now you're talking about activation of purpose. Great. Okay, we have this amazing statement on the wall, and it's different than mission and a mission statement. It's different than a vision statement. So what was the next connective piece that you then, like, did you teach the CEO and the leaders like what that meant and how they should act? Did you create a manager training? Like, how did you bring that to life? Because again, it's a great, beautiful statement, but you're talking about actually like doing something with it. How does that
Yeah.
inform how a company actually operates?
Well, if you have a purpose and you have this awareness, right, that like we have to do something more to activate it, I think one of the things that I've seen that is most successful is to start to like um, document, to codify where we are today. Because I would say every purpose driven, all companies, even ones that are like particularly purpose driven, are we're all on a journey, including Jeff, right? Like we're all on a journey. We're not perfect, right? To have an activated purpose and align culture and stakeholder centricity and leadership, and like that's a lot, right? And how do you
Culture
operationalize
is
that?
not a
And so
destination.
it is not a destination, it is a journey. But I would argue that like, if you're trying to lose weight or get healthier, like documenting where you started and what you're actually doing so that you can measure your progress can be a really helpful thing, right? And so the first thing that we did is like take all these elements and we put it together on a scorecard. So you can actually rate. We go in with leadership teams, we actually sit down and say, how you doing on activating your purpose, right? On a scale of like 1 through 5, right? And we can actually rate. And some of this is based on anecdotal feedback from your leadership team, but we can also go in and like look at what's happening, right? What are the artifacts? What are the behaviors? What are the things that are happening? And give yourself an actual rating of how purpose driven you are.
Well, so what's the thing on the, you're like, I'm going to put the rating card. You're like, how well am I helping families appreciate the joy of everyday things? Like what goes on that? What is the, and I'm doing this because
Yeah,
where I
that's
feel
a
like
great.
we can get deeper in, I want to know, like, I think everybody who listens, most of the people who are listening to the podcast, are like, yeah, purpose. Totally. Josh, you talk about this all the time. So it's like, tell me specifically, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So specifically, if you're talking about like, okay, how are we doing on our activated purpose? I would ask questions like, well, one, do you have a purpose beyond making money? Like,
Right.
okay, let's start
Obviously.
there.
Number
Okay,
one.
if you have that, can all employees articulate the purpose in an authentic way?
Okay, great.
Or is that something that like the CEO and maybe 5 other people can do? I wouldn't say
Awareness,
your
right? So
awareness
awareness.
and
Yep.
awareness. Um, then if they can do that, like does the company guide company decision making and priorities? Do you actually like consider it when you are making strategic decisions about what you're going to do? That's a
Application.
whole nother level of like application, right?
Yep.
And then if you're doing that pretty well, like is the purpose embedded into company governance systems? Like, are you actually measuring and tracking what you are doing over time? I think that's a pretty high bar. Not very many organizations are doing
That
that, but
is,
like,
yeah.
man, if you are, like, I want to give you a lot more credit for doing that and really
Yeah.
embedding it into the fabric of your DNA and like how you're working every day versus just like having a statement. I'm not just devaluating having the statement. That can be like a hard work right there. But
Yeah.
like that is just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Does that make
So
sense?
it does. Absolutely. So how do you create awareness? How do you teach your clients to move along that, right? So you just told us the story about do you. Okay, we have it.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about awareness, and then we're going to talk about application, and maybe not get into the governance because that's rarefied air.
We're not there yet, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think we are. You know what? I
No, but
think
I think, oh, sorry, I was just gonna, sorry to interrupt, but like, I think a great example of a company like that is like Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's is not a client or someone I work with, but like they are known, they have a lot of, public information out there that I think they have like pretty great governance systems around
they
how
certainly
they're
do.
actually living their purpose, right?
Yep.
And I think,
Yep.
right, in terms of like having share like metrics around how they're performing, being able to like make that public, put that out in a report every year. And so
I
it
love
like
that
holds them
example.
to it and other people hold it. And so
Yeah,
it is possible.
it is possible. Oh, totally. It's totally possible. For sure. How do you help? I have my own assumptions around, I think about it like this, and it can be with purpose or it can be with values. First is
Yeah,
awareness, or do they exist? Let's say assume they do. Awareness.
totally.
Do you know? Can you tell me what they are? And then second is understanding, what do they mean? And then the third, to your point, application, right? So awareness, understanding, application. Those to me that's what I would, and that's what I think you're talking about when you're talking about a scorecard. And then that's what we advise. You're like, okay, if you're going to do a regular survey or however you're going to measure it, that's what you want to know. And you're going to see kind of phased bumps, right? Like rollout. Yay, we have it. Everybody goes, yay, we have it. And then it's like, well, what does that mean? And now we have to do the next thing.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. It's like awareness, understanding, embedding that into the organization and like decision making, and then like governance, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it gets harder over time. And I think, what we're finding is that, I'm not gonna. So the highest, so we've been like rating all these companies, all these purpose-driven companies, right, and developing our own kind of index, if you
You have
will,
a
at Jump around.
purpose index or something like
We
that?
do, we do. That, and actually, very soon, people are going
Hot
to be able to
stuff.
come to our website, and anybody, whether you're a client of Jump or not, can like go and like rate your own company, so you can get your own sense of
I'm
like actually how purpose
I'm
driven you
first in
are.
line. Let me know. I want
Yeah.
to know when it's up.
But it does get progressively harder over time. And so you're right. Like we're working with an organization right now to do some like purpose activation rollout. We're going to do a series. So we did work last year. We have a purpose statement, and then we're going to go and we're going to do some immersions where we're going to like, introduce this to all the employees and have them try it on and stuff. And so I do suspect that their purpose score is going to go around activated purpose is going to go up pretty dramatically in the next few months, right? But then to get to the next level of
Yep.
like guiding decision making,
Yes.
that is harder, right? And probably going to take longer. And there's more work to do there.
How do you do
yeah.
it? I mean, how do you get people to what are your either in experience or in hypothesis, how do
Yeah.
you get people to start using it in their day-to-day,
Yeah. I
even the
think it
executives, right? Like they're
totally,
I feel
well,
like I have to beat them over the head.
I think it exists on a few different levels, right? I think there's like, how do you normalize some of this stuff and just make it not like some one more thing that we have to add to our to-do list, if you will, because everyone is busy, and despite our best intentions, right? Like it
Yep.
might just fall to the bottom of the list and not happen. So how do you kind of work it into our everyday and like create rituals and behaviors that keep it top of mind, right? So
Ding, ding,
like,
ding.
yeah, exactly. Like stuff that you can do, like, hey, you're probably having a leadership team meeting anyway. And if we all know that we have this purpose and we've all said that we believe that this is important, and let's assume it is, right? Like, why not take like a minute at the beginning of your meeting and be like, how do we do anything happen this week that like showed that we like lived our purpose, and just tell a story, right?
I'm
Like,
nodding vigorously.
you're probably they might do that anyway. They're probably saying what happened this week, or like what is the updates going on, right? Everybody's doing some sort of like either giving updates or
And
like
just tie it back to the purpose.
just tie
Just
it
tie
back
it
to the
back to the
purpose,
purpose. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I know you're a big fan of sort of celebrations around like culture and values and stuff, right? And I think, yeah, that's another great way to do it, like values awards and stuff, right? And those are great. Some companies, you might do that at a holiday party or at the end of the year, which is awesome. I would say even better if you can work it in more often, right? Like
Absolutely.
weekly acknowledgments, like, hey, I want to shout out this person because they lived our value in this like meeting that happened, or
Yep.
this interaction that I had with them. Those sort of things like are not that hard. Probably some activity is happening in the normal day to day anyway. And how do you work these things in
If
so they're top
you
of
can
mind?
find the thing, like a thing that's already happening, and then connect that to purpose, that's like, so you don't have to spend I mean, it's not, you do have to start new things, right? You're going to have to change,
Sure.
and that's the hard part. But why not just piggyback on already, if we have a get together or like you said, a staff meeting or whatever it might be. That is such an important insight to make things a little bit easier
Totally.
in
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
adoption, right? Can we talk about, so you're teasing with this purpose index. How do you measure that? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. So if you can imagine, like you can score yourself, right? Like you can also what we've been doing is basically looking at how companies that are rating pretty highly on these like purpose scores that that I've been talking about, um, does that impact their financial performance at all? Right. I mean, because at the end
Uh,
of the day, I think everyone's saying, yeah, it's better. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I think you and I have this
I
idea
feel
like it
better.
might be better to
Right.
be a purpose driven company. Right. And it's like, yeah, I might like it more, but like, does that really help my business? At the end of the day, like what is it in service of, right? Because like
Yes.
there's a lot of talk, I would say, like companies out there talking a big game about what being purpose driven is going to get you, right? And I do think like, yeah, if it feels better, it like clearly there's some benefit around like maybe being able
In,
to better hire
engagement.
employees,
Yep.
engagement, right? Like
Retention.
employing, like maybe attract employees to come work at my company in the first place or
Yeah.
retain them, like
Yeah.
that's awesome, right? But like
Yep.
beyond that, like is it going to benefit my business, right? And I would argue yes. Now again, you're playing the long game here, right? But we've been basically tracking, so there's a lot of companies that are purpose driven. I think if you look at ones that we can actually track their performance over time, which we can't all, because many purpose driven companies, there's many wonderful privately owned founder driven
You
organizations,
don't
and like
have the
I don't
data.
have access to all of their
Yeah.
financial performance, but we can look at publicly traded companies, and many of them I think are also purpose driven, and many are not, right? But if you take some of those purpose driven ones, and that's exactly what we've been doing, of like looking at how they have been performing for the last 20 years, against some of their comparables, comparable companies. So you imagine like if you take a company like Southwest Airlines, I think they're very well known. I would say they're a pretty purpose driven organization, and compare them to like their American or United, which are leading airline comparables in their industry. How are they performing, right? Or same thing, like a Harley Davidson versus, like a Yamaha, or
Mhm.
a Starbucks or Chipotle compared to like McDonald's or Dunkin' or like Wendy's, that kind of stuff. You can start to see that over time, they actually indeed do outperform purpose,
How
non-purpose driven comparables.
okay, okay. So let's sharpen this a little bit. How do you define a purpose driven company? Because you just said, and I agreed, that anybody can have a purpose. It doesn't mean that that's activated. So are you defining them just by and assuming, I don't know, maybe I'll stop.
No,
How do you define a purpose driven company?
you are absolutely right. I think that is the whole thing, right? Because if you look at what is a purpose driven company, and you're making your own qualitative assessment of what is a purpose driven company, there's a lot of room for interpretation there, right? And so
Yeah.
what do we mean by a purpose driven company? They have an activated purpose. So they actually have a real statement that is
Okay.
more than making money. They have an aligned culture, which is again a set of beliefs and behaviors, right? That like actually drive that. They have this idea, they live this idea of stakeholder centricity, right? Like being able to create value beyond their investors. They're investing in their leaders and next level leaders, and they are planning for the future and being like much more future focused, in terms of like where they're going. And yeah, you can look at different levels of that. And so I think, just to play that out in a company like Google, for example, before I did this work, I wouldn't necessarily that they would say that they were maybe the most purpose driven, but like they have an amazing future focused perspective. I think a
Of
lot,
course. That's the whole thing.
and that's the whole thing, right? And so maybe they have more work to do on some of the other aspects, but like I would say, are still on the path as well, right?
Mm.
Or next level leadership, companies like Netflix, for example. I think Reed Hastings, for example, the former CEO, is like really done a wonderful job of like being able to develop next level leadership, right? And like leaders that have gone on to like work at other organizations and do other things. And so again, like companies, I should say, are going to be at different levels of development and sophistication around different factors around being purpose driven, but that those, if they do that with intention, actually
Yes.
can drive a lot of different parts of their business.
So to me, what you're describing is more of a jump index than necessarily explicitly a purpose index, because you have leadership, you have, and these are all great things, right? Of course, you've got purpose and you've got alignment, a plus, right? But you're also talking about a future facing, right? That's your bias, and I think rightfully so, obviously, and the executive training. I mean, you could extrapolate those two features and see how that plays out. And I
You
think this is awesome. I mean, I think it's really interesting data. I'm what I'm seeing is a yes and of like, it's about purpose, and maybe half of those functions are purposey.
Well, totally. I think like you are right in that any company could say, we're going to be about the future or we're going to develop leaders, right?
Mhm.
That may have nothing to do with purpose. And I would argue that companies that actually care about purpose and have an activated purpose and culture will get more out of their purpose, be able to have more impact, be able to deliver more results to everyone involved if it is not just an internal uh, exercise, but actually embedded into your entire long term strategy
Yep.
and choices that you're making about what you're investing in. And that's why I bring all of these things together in terms of what truly makes a purpose driven
And
organization.
that ties us right back to that first thing that we were talking about, which is purpose is a lens. It's a decision-making
Totally.
tool. And so you could be training leaders, but to do what? You could be
Exactly.
future
In
focused
service of what?
in service of what?
Of
What am
what?
I,
Exactly.
because, and this year, oh, look at that bright, shiny thing, over here. And the next year, I'm like, well, it needs to be AI. I'm going to go over here and, right? Like that's,
Totally.
that's so
Exactly.
I think that's thank you
It,
for engaging with me, and that just
no, and thank you for pushing it because I think that's a really important point because they could seem like disparate things, right? And they are often disparate things for companies and for organizations. And I would argue less there's benefit in thinking of them holistically, right? To
right,
drive their
exactly,
purpose. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. In service of what?
In service of what?
That's
Well,
the
maybe
question.
maybe you can start maybe the next 10 years you guys can start some sort of fund of all these, a basket of right, like an ETF of purpose driven organizations,
That
and
would be pretty
track
cool.
that.
Totally.
Um, Amazing. Colleen Murray, who partner of Jump Associates. Thank you so much. Your URL, I just assume, is jumpassociates.com. I forgot to ask.
You got it. That is correct.
Jumpassociates.com. It is so good to talk to you and catch up. I'm
You
so
too.
thrilled to see that you guys are really putting in the hard work to not only continue to push this construct, but also measure it. And keep checking back on jumpassociates.com, because you're going to be releasing that index, or you're going to release some sort of self-assessment. Is that correct?
We are, yeah. People will be able to actually go rate their own company if they want to do that, which would be super fun. And I think I know we're about to wrap up here, but I think that yeah, I know you and I both love this stuff, right? And so it's just
Yeah.
like fun to like geek out and talk about it. But I think that there are and probably a lot of people that listen to this podcast also love this, right? And like want to learn, which is super cool. And so thank you for having me on to be part of that community. But I also think that like companies I don't know, something is changing. I don't know if you feel like this. Something is changing in the world a little bit, like that whether, people are not just buying stuff, but really thinking about voting with their dollar, I guess is the terminology. But like everything from like people wanting to go out and buy a Patagonia sweatshirt because they want to like save the planet to people boycotting like Bud Light or Target for what they did during Pride Month because they disagree with those. Like, it's not a choice for organizations anymore. I think that like consumers are savvy and they're looking beyond the surface and they're looking at what these companies stand for and what they are. And so it's not just a nice to have thing. I would argue that this is really going to be about the future. Like, it's going to be hard for companies to be to maintain relevancy if they're not actually paying attention to the bigger why, and making those choices because they will be forced to. And I think I would argue, get on it. And it's better to be proactive and be able to like actually manage that and control that and kind of figure out what you want to do versus like having somebody tell that story for you.
It's going to happen whether you
It's going to
pay
happen.
attention to it or not, right? Thank you,
Totally.
Colleen. It's been a real pleasure. Appreciate you
Thank
coming on.
you. Thanks for having me on, Josh.